Alright, response video, I think, of sorts anyway, to Professor Anton. Reaction video, we'll call it, whatever. Anthropomorphism. I think he spelled it wrong, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, yeah, so let's play the video.
This is basically a question video, and I would like to get some response from people about the degree or the extent to which people can successfully get out of anthropocentrism. Now, I've heard...
Yeah, well, the fact is we probably should never gotten into it. And the only reason why we got into it is because we have these old myths that have completely aggrandized human existence. Because that's the first thing that human beings did. As soon as they found out they could think and they could talk and they could communicate and they could learn and they could take advantage, yeah, they figured, okay, we're so much better than the rest of these little critters because we can beat them over the head with one of our old leg bones and smash their skulls and eat their guts and whatever other bullshit we want to do. We can, pull glands out of them and smear it on us and it's good perfume or some other kind of bullshit. But that was just scheming dumb animals, right? I mean, that wasn't something to be proud of. Oh, the human species is using its brain to scheme an advantage, to make itself more violent and more effective in terms of put a nice point on the stick as it rams it into the innards of some other beastie. Yeah, that's hardly like big brain stuff. That's little brain stuff.
A lot of talk, criticism about anthropocentrism. Here on YouTube, people say, oh, you're being anthropocentric. You're somehow privileging human experience, or you're suggesting that humans are somehow more valuable as a species than other species, or you're
well, so this gets a little tricky because it turns into straw man arguments. I mean, people aren't really making these arguments. You're making the counter argument, okay? And so people are counter arguing your proposition, which is that somehow we are innately, grander a mechanism, and that can be argued whether the real core that we live for, the thing that we're really trying to protect with our intelligence, the facade of our culture, the whole crap of our clothing, the whole game we're playing. What are we protecting with all of this armor of our institutions? We're protecting a kernel of sensitivity that will be argued exists in these other creatures, that they have the same kernel of sense organs and vulnerability to harm and pain and suffering and misery. And that's really the core value, is what's going to be argued as a counter-argument to you. That the intelligence is nice. It's a nice attribute to have. It makes us, we have this capacity to know better. To know. And they don't. But is it something that we should necessarily give ourselves a privileged position for having? Does it innately earn us more appreciation? So the argument's more about how would you treat a lesser human being of lower IQ? Should the people of high IQ presume themselves superior, presume themselves more sensitive, that they should they should sleep on a softer bed than the retards? That's the argument that people like me will make a counter argument to your suggestion that might be true, that somehow intelligence makes us grander an instrument in terms of our sensitivity or our capacity to be harmed. And I think that's rubbish.
Suggesting that the way humans make sense of things or think about things is to be some measure against which other organisms are evaluated, or something like this. Again, there's lots of different ways that people come at anthropocentrism, but I think the question would be, is it possible, or to what degree is it possible, to escape from that?
Well, I think it's really easy. I mean, your brain realizes, you do a little bit of calculating, and you figure out that, okay, we evolved, we've only had this culture thing for 10,000 stinking little years, okay, 20 at the most. And for the whole history of evolution, we were among the animals, we were among the apes, and we were before that the other critters that they, came from. And that this capacity to feel has been around a long, 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 long time. and that we aren't doing the feeling thing in any richer way. We're doing the thinking thing in a richer way. And there's a big difference. The thing I value in my existence is what I'm feeling emotionally, psychologically, that comfort, that peace, of body and mind, is what I'm attempting to achieve, or what I'm attempting to. That's the focus of my desire, the focus of the life mission. The life mission isn't I will exist and come up with some calculation of value. That'd be nice. That might give me some ego gratification in some incidental way, but that's not really the mission of my personal life.
Now, let me see if I can try to explain some of that. And again, I'm interested in what people's reactions are, the way that they would address this. The other day, I saw a bumper sticker, and the bumper sticker said, "Equal rights for all species."
All right, now, yeah, so right there we're in trouble, right? Because if you're going to argue such an extreme statement, I mean, it doesn't really mean anything, right? I mean, a right should be given based on the content of character thing, right? We can go back to that argument. Not the color of skin, not the nature of species. So, yeah, it's not even that it's anthropomorphic, as it is a kind of, it's almost stupid to sit there and say that you can classify what we are as something that is native to all species. That's just kind of silly. I mean, there's species of organism that don't have any developed sentient capacity. So why would they have an equal right? That would be insipid. So yeah, it becomes a straw man argument when you argue the extremist position, and that's sort of an extremist position. That's like a fundamentalist bumper sticker for a Christian saying, "Did you stone a homosexual today?" or something else. There's no real point in arguing with somebody that stupid, and there's no real point in arguing with something so trite and simplistic. There's no point in arguing with bumper stickers, really. Just don't read bumper stickers. Okay, life's always a little more complicated than 4 or 5 words. You always got to put 2 or 3 sentences together to make a point. So you're not going to make a point with some kind of stupid bumper sticker.
Now, when this person who puts this bumper sticker up and it says equal rights for all species, I think we understand what they're saying. They're trying to say, I'm wanting to be non-anthropocentric here. But the question is that anthropocentric or is it not?
Well, I don't, like I said, it just kind of depends on whether you're going to get all egoed about where you're on some IQ scale. So the fact that you have enough IQ to have a perception, to say, or even enough exposure in life. So if you never heard Mozart or something like that, and so if you've heard Mozart, all of a sudden you apply some sort of grandioseness to yourself because you have some kind of higher caliber of being. That's really the question, whether whether that difference is enough of a difference. The fact that we can contemplate where something should even rank on a scale, the fact that we can even contemplate a scale, does that fact mean that we are entitled to something more in terms of if your car is going to run over something? A great ape of any kind, an orangutan, a chimpanzee, a gorilla, or let's say a retarded human being. If those are the two things that are on at jeopardy, I don't think you can make a rational argument. Okay, one that isn't from a bias, from a prejudice, from an irrational prejudice, an irrational affection, to say that yes, it's better that the harm be imposed on that other creature because it never heard Mozart. I mean, it's just not a good enough standard for a deviation in concern.
Now, if you say that it's not, how is that not anthropocentric? I mean, there's something very odd about the calling it non-anthropocentrism when you...
Look, you think that there's something very odd in not getting all egomaniacal because we have a certain brain faculty that allows us to do calculations and to have a grander sense of perception. That somehow we should think we are better than the other organisms, not because we feel more, not because we can be harmed easier, not because we are more sensitive, like we have some softer spot, that we are more emotional. No, you're going to make the argument that we are somehow superior because we can put things on a scale? I mean, come on.
Or trying to deal with the concerns over other species than your own. Because that's almost definitively anthropocentric. That is, if I look out at nature and I...
Well, yeah, again, why would I care? Species is, like I said, if you're going to make the distinction based on nothing that matters, if it's an irrelevant distinction, then it might as well be called racism as well as speciesism. So I just don't think you can sit there and say, let's get anthropomorphic about our species, and then we can subclass the rest of the humans as some other species. You know, we can take race and turn into species, or we can take race and turn into a line of delineation and say they are sub whatever we are because we're the superior race. I mean, that just doesn't go anywhere. If you're going to make a distinction, then make it on a certain attribute of substance. And I'm going to argue that intelligence is not an attribute of substance. People aren't living for their intelligence. They're using their intelligence like a tool. They're using it like a great white shark uses its fucking teeth. But they're not. It doesn't make the substance of the animal any greater. The substance of what we are is the feeling, emotional little creature. That's what we're struggling through the world with. That's the thing that we're using the intelligence to manipulate the world to satisfy. So let's not pretend that because we have bigger teeth that we have a grander soul.
And I see, a squirrel, or if I see a cat and it has a hurt paw or it has a broken leg, I can empathize with it and I can really, feel suffering for that animal. And when I'm concerned about it and I'm trying to get out of my own view, is that getting out of my own view, or is that in fact the human view? Do those animals comparatively worry about my broken arm? Now,
yeah, and like I said, is that the obligation, though? Is that the standard? Is the capacity to do this intelligent thing and have images, contextual fantasies even, fall through our consciousness to augment what we see, so we don't see things simply anymore. Like an animal would just see it as shiny or pointy or scary or attractive, or they have a very simple reaction to things. All right, we have this higher context that gives things a richer, we can see more of it, we can see its lineage, we can see billions of years into its evolution, we can see a grander context. Well, does seeing a grander context change the pain of a broken leg? I would argue no, it doesn't.
Maybe they do. Maybe I'm being anthropocentric. I don't know if there is any way out of this. I think part of the problem is that we seem to be using concepts, human creations, linguistic resources that we forget that we've created and used.
Yeah, well, that's sort of the problem, though, too, is that those resources, that the adaptations we have that make us stick out, so to speak, or that have created the distinction, something that we can see the difference between, have been ones contained in the brain vessel. Okay, they're not like we have long claws or sharp teeth or some other physical attribute that gives us this distinction. So the distinction is muddled up within the brain mixture. Now, the other mammal brains, though, they have the fundamental mixture. They have the 90% brain, all right? They have the emotions. They have the sensations. And they might even have them to a richer extent than we do, because we might have sacrificed some of that sensual connection to the earth to have this intellect thing. Because our neurons are now active on a different... working on different problems, but they still have billions of brain cells. They still have billions of neural connections. They still have rich lives as emotional and sensitive beings, and that's really the argument here. Does this intellectual capacity crap, this learning language thing, and doing this big conceptualization crap make life for us give us a right to claim privilege, to claim immunities to the same sort of harshness that they're exposed to. And I would argue that I don't think there's a rational reason to say we have earned an immunity that we shouldn't be attempting to extend to them also. And yes, it is a scale of some sort of progression, but who wants to sit there and play the game of figuring out how much of a person with a 60 IQ is? I mean, do you want that job?
There's just so many different examples, but if I say, for example, that each organism is equally evolutionarily adapted to its niche or its environment, and it isn't as if there is some phylogenetic scale where humans are at the highest point of it and then other organisms are like less evolutionarily developed.
Well, let's understand too, it depends on what you're kind of being admirable of, what you're admiring in something, whether you're admiring its power or its symmetry or the function of its physical mass. I mean, you might argue a tiger or something is just so fucking kick-ass compared to a feeble fucking human in terms of how it maximizes, how it gets so much out of its strength and its power and its form and its whole build, and how humans have become physically weak and mushy because they have relied on this scheming tool to get them out of trouble, this little conniving advantage. And so by a different standard of appreciation, we could be described as incredibly ugly, incredibly inadequate to the task. And if we look at ourselves emotionally, what are we emotionally? How much of the human race is pretty much emotionally crippled? An emotional basket case. I'd say a big, giant, huge hunk of it, a big, giant percentage of it. Nothing to be too fucking proud of. We're not very strong emotionally.
That would be a kind of anthropocentrism, a person might say. Now, I can agree with that. I think I understand the point. There's something very, right about that. But there's another sense in which that's just a different kind of anthropocentrism. That is, there's no such thing as niches, as environments, as hierarchies. Those are all just human concepts.
Well, I think that's just nonsense. I mean, because humans give something a name, because they label something, doesn't mean that the distinction isn't rationally justifiable and definable. It's not like we're saying one's called Jack and one's called Jim and one's called Fred, and we're just making an arbitrary name-calling thing. These distinctions have a meaning. They represent delineations in form and character and abilities and attributes. And so it's just nonsense to say that we have just made that up. We didn't make it up. We discovered it. It's part of what our advantage is that we have a brain that's capable of recognizing things that are different and defining and describing the differences.
We're just using human concepts to try to imagine what is somehow outside of human concepts. And I'm not trying to disagree with the philosophical spirit of trying to not be anthropocentric. The question is there any escape from it? Doesn't it?
I don't think it's. Yeah, I think it's not that hard to say to yourself that yes, that's where we have to accept a certain reality of the living condition, and the living condition is not just a human condition. We came from a world of mammals, of other beings that were of high sense capacity, and yes, we can categorize them, we can draw distinctions between us and them, but we have to be careful that those are rational distinctions and not distinctions based on the fact that we found them on a dumb continent with no language and no science and no ability, and therefore we have described and defined them. Is that all we are? Is our education? Does our education make us a better, more deserving, more capable in terms of that core feeling beast? No, I'm going to argue 1,000,000 years ago when we didn't have any of that crap, we were still sensitive organisms that you wouldn't just harm for no good fucking reason, just as you shouldn't harm any other animal for no good fucking reason.
just gets smuggled in the back door. Nietzsche has this great passage in his essay Truth and Lies in the Ultra-Moral Sense, and he says, and he's criticizing anthropocentrism, but he says that a gnat very likely flies through the air with the same pathos as humans do, sort of taking itself to be the center at all moments. And he says, who are we to judge the perspective of the bird or of the worm? Why do we think that the worm's perspective is any less legitimate or real than our perspective?
Well, again, it's sort of a straw man argument, I guess. I'm just saying that, yeah, you can argue some extreme position. I think we do understand why a worm isn't a mammal. It doesn't have the billions of neural connections. It doesn't have the same capacities, probably. We don't know for sure, in terms of its capacity to be truly harmed, to be, to have the emotional life and all the other things that we appreciate, and there would be reasons to have a thing called concern, or even reason to have an argument about whether we should be too egocentric, or whether we should feel too important, or whether we should devote some of our mental resource to the care of other organisms who are trapped in the natural world and have been left behind by our civilization. Our civilization hasn't considered them as members and hasn't given them any time, hasn't devoted any of its advantage power to fixing that problem, has only been dealing with human problems because of that aggrandized perception of value. Like this cat who wants something. Yes, well, you already had food. Can I just finish this video, please? Please?
To which I say, yeah, I think that there's so much that's right-minded in there, and yet another part of me is haunted by this. Does Nietzsche not notice that he's imagining gnat perspectives and worm perspectives? I'm not sure the degree to which worms are worried about whether or not our perspectives are somehow deviating from that.
Well, I'm sure. See, when you say, I'm not sure, these are word games that you're playing, right? You're perfectly aware that worms are not thinking about human beings, and they're not thinking about human civilization, and they're not considering any of that, because number one, they don't have the brain to do it, and number two, they don't have the contextual education to do it. They haven't gone to school, they haven't learned science, they haven't been able to acquire any of those enhanced perspectives that we are afforded. So, I think the answer is quite plainly and factually, no, a worm isn't doing any of that. Yet you're arguing from this position as if it is a real position held by someone. And, yeah, I think it's just kind of bullshit. So at least be honest about it and say, why ask the question as if you intend it to be serious when you know damn well it's not a serious question.
No, maybe there are.
No, maybe there aren't.
When you say that, when someone says, look, I have the knowledge that animals think and they have a theory of mind in the same way we do, there's something that seems to be very anthropocentric about that. Now, not in the obvious way. In an obvious way, it seems very non-anthropocentric. The person's going to go, look, no, I'm realizing that other animals also think in similar ways that we do. No.
Yeah, well, they think, obviously, look, Arabs don't think like Christians, okay? Americans don't think like Islamabobs. We already know that. These distinctions are quite obvious. 20th century man doesn't think like first century man. So, why play the game? We know that there are distinctions and differences. The question is, do these differences add up to a right of superiority, a right to a better life, a right to more time spent considering their needs than considering need in itself and of itself? They're the slaves no less than we are. Just as my individual welfare is is not superior to your welfare. Okay, my pain is not better than your pain. That my brain, in essence, should not be any more committed to my welfare than my brain is committed to your welfare, as it all adds up to the same thing. That's the intelligent perspective, the unanthropomorphic, unegocentric, undistorted, or broken by personal advantage. Let's just concede that we are brains possessed by a selfish organism, an individual selfish organism, and that our brains will be servants to that king. But there's no reason to intellectually or philosophically argue that there's anything rational in that, and that is an irrationality we all need to overcome.
You came to that conclusion by empirical scientific study. I'm pretty confident that other animals aren't out there performing scientific studies and postulating theories of mind within.
And I'm pretty sure it isn't relevant to whether or not their welfare is just as important as your welfare. And that's the real core issue. Is their pain real? Is their suffering real? Then we have to account for it. We can't just pretend it doesn't exist, because that's what our brain is focused on. It's focused on my brain thinks, worries, contemplates my welfare. Why does it do that? Because I have a welfare, because I can feel good and I can feel bad, and that's the thing that matters. And my brain is also smart enough to know that it doesn't matter whether these feelings manifest themselves in my body or your body or a cow's body. It's all fucking goddamn feeling that matters.
Academic, frameworks, can other organisms have rudimentary experiences that are similar to us, dissimilar to us, the whole range?
Well, what? Can a lion love its cubs? Can she? I think she can.
All of it starts to become very nebulous. I guess the moral of the story is, very simply stated, I want people to please respond to this. If you see the bumper sticker, and the bumper sticker says equal rights for all species, is that an act of a person being non-anthropocentric, or is that a kind of illustration and an exemplification of a different form of anthropocentrism?
Well, whatever. If you're going to argue that every time we think, we therefore are egomaniacal assholes, yeah, no, I don't think so. I don't think the act of thinking demonstrates that our superiority or our right of entitlement. So I think you can argue that we don't have complete, full entitlement without being anthropomorphic, without conceding the argument that we're somehow better. And that's what this argument's about. It's about betterness. Are we better? Okay, and the argument's just being made that we're not better. Okay, a lion loving her cubs is just as good as a mother human loving her kids. And take all the fucking pretense out of that equation, and that's all there is. There's just this capacity to be emotionally tied to something, to be harmable, to have your life ruined, to have a bad day. These are the things that matter. All right, the things that don't matter is this pretense of, look at us, we landed on the moon, Therefore, we somehow have earned a privilege of some kind. And it's hard to even see what the privilege has been, just because we do seem to do nothing but harass each other and create reason to be miserable.
Thanks.
Oakley doke. So anyway, yeah. So till next time, I guess that's enough. I mean, it's 20 minutes or more, right? Sorry, but it happens. So I'm probably on the website. Yay. Ciao.